a 1969 graduate of the Smeal College of Business, and celebrating his 20 years of giving back to the college. As a member of the Smeal Board of Visitors, George Strickler serves as chairman of the board of Summa Health, a $1.8 billion nonprofit health organization that provides integrated and coordinated care for the people of Northeast Ohio. He's also president and CEO of Hickory Ridge Industries. George has spent 5 decades as a senior global executive leading major corporations, including Goodyear Tire, BorgWarner, Stone Ridge, Republic Engineered Products, and Lake West. He has held various leadership roles, including EVP and CFO, COO, Chief Accounting Officer, and Treasurer across a variety of industries, including automotive, commercial, agricultural, consumer, and distribution services. Most recently, George joined the Summa Health Board of Directors in 2018 and was appointed chairman of the board in January 2019. His volunteer leadership has led the organization through the pandemic and guided them to the construction of a 60-bed new behavioral health facility that's set to open next year. George has been such an active member of the Smeal Board of Visitors since 2002, sharing his career insights with students, participating, judging case competitions, and he's been a major philanthropic supporter. As a mentor, George has fostered strong relationships with Penn State graduates, helping them forge successful careers as industry leaders. George received the Smeal Distinguished Achievement Award in 2020, and he was honored for his philanthropic support and community leadership in 2021. Congratulations, George. It's such an honor for me to present this Alumni Fellow Award to you.
You know, these are all tough acts to follow, but I want to talk about the journey of life. And many of you don't know this, but I grew up almost 70 years ago where the Bryce Jordan Center, my father was in the military, came back from the Korean War, and we lived in a trailer camp right where Bryce Jordan sits today, and there was a chicken farm down below where my 2 aunts worked. And my mother and father divorced when I was in the 3rd grade, and I moved to Ohio. So I was really torn after graduation in 1969. I applied to Ohio State and I applied to Penn State. But I have my uncle here, Don Strickler. He's 90 years old. And my aunt, who's 84 years old, Ruth Ann, called me and they said, you have to give Penn State a chance. So I came up to the campus and I fell in love with it. And I enrolled in 1965 and graduated in 1969. And the Strickler family, it's been a tradition. They were all first generation. So I had my father, my uncle, my 3 aunts, and actually one of the uncles that was married to an aunt was the dean of the geology school. So Penn State's been in our lifeblood forever. When I graduated, I went back to Goodyear because I was number 6 in the Vietnam War draft, and I didn't want to go into as a military officer. And so I enrolled in the Army Reserves. But my first day at Goodyear, I got a call from the chief financial officer, and his name was J.R. Hicks. And here I find out he was a Penn State graduate. He introduced me to Bob Lane, who was the vice president of human resources. And it started a journey in my life. And he came back to me about a year and a half later. And I had a mentor called Tom Whiteman and J.R. Hicks. And they convinced me I should think about going overseas. And I was in law school for 2 years. So I transferred. I got my MBA from Akron U. And I got my CPA. And one day he came around the corner of my office and he says, did you have enough? And I said, what do you mean by do I have enough? And he said, are you ready to go overseas? And I accepted that. My wife said, well, as long as we go to Canada, that's fine. But it wasn't Canada. So I'm in my late 20s, early 30s, and I go, and I'm the treasurer of Goodyear Brazil, and all my banks are Brazilian and speaking Portuguese. So I went home with a headache for the first 6 months, and after that, I started getting fluent in Portuguese. We transferred to Peru, so I speak a little Portuñol today as opposed to just Portuguese or Spanish. But I did leave Goodyear after 30 years. I was at the Harvard AMP program, and Michael Porter was in our session one day with leadership, and he said, there's only one person responsible for your career, and that's yourself. And I had a very good friend that I got to know, and he worked in Asia, I worked in Latin America, and he became the CEO of Borg Warner. And I joined him as the CFO in 2001, and we made an amazing trend on that company. We converted it from a mechanical to an electronic company, and we grew it from 1.8 billion to 5.4 billion. Well, one day I was sitting in the office, and my assistant said, do you know a Dean Judy Olean? And I said, well, I know her. And she said, she wants to have dinner with you tonight. And I said, well, I got a lot of commitments, and I can't just change everything. But Judy convinced me I should go to dinner that night. And we had a board of visitors with 8 people at the time. I joined them in 2002, and today we have one of the most enriched boards I've ever contributed with. We have nearly 32 people from around the world. And I always said on a board you'd sit there for 5 or 6 years, but it was so enriching to me. I've been on the board almost 20 years, and I give a lot of credit to Dean Whiteman and to Michelle and what the SMEAL team does, and people like Gene and Larry are on that board. And then I was honored by this, and Dean Whiteman called me before he was going on a golf trip to Scotland. And he says, you've been honored as the fellow. And I said, what's a fellow? And so I looked it up online, and I said, geez, this is really a nice honor. And here I find out that Michelle and my wife have been talking for quite a while, getting reference letters and all that stuff. And my wife usually tells me everything, but in this case, she never told me anything. So it was a complete surprise to me. But, you know, I've been honored for a lot of things over my total career. But I'll tell you, the most proudest thing I have is my family. We have 4 great children. Education is a strong part of that. George and Steve are both Penn State graduates. Todd escaped my influence of Penn State, and he went to UCLA. But the day it was announced UCLA is part of the Big Ten, I called him and I said, I now have you back in the Big Ten. And then Lauren, she went to Dartmouth and got her master's degree, and she's with the Washington football team. And I said, there's no correlation here, except that Jawan Dotson is now their star receiver. He's had 3 touchdowns in the last 2 weeks. So, you know, I guess there is alliances with Penn State. But I think it's really about relationships and what you do with the risk and opportunities you have in your career. And I've had a lot of opportunities. I've worked for 5 major corporations. And Kevin, you touched me tonight about behavioral health. And one of the reasons as chairman of Summa Health that we built a behavioral health facility, $87 million, it's opening up in January. During the pandemic, we've seen so much child abuse, spousal abuse, and drug addiction that we were convicted that we needed to do that. And going back in my history, I grew up on a farm in Blairsville, Pennsylvania. My dad was the general manager of State Mental Institution in Torrance, in Blairsville, which all got shut down. We have 5 in Pennsylvania, we had 6 in Ohio, and they're all gone today. And you wonder where our mental health capabilities have gone. Well, they've disappeared because we stopped them in state funding. So I want to thank Chuck Whiteman and Michelle for this honor. I know they recommended working with my wife. And I want to thank the Alumni Association. And I'll tell you, I sat in amazement tonight listening to all the honorees and the graduates we have at Penn State. And I traveled the world for 45 years. And everywhere I went, I met a Penn Stater. And it's like you knew that individual for 20 years. So we are all Penn State proud. My 4 children, my wife is an adopted Penn Stater. So I applaud all of you for the recognition tonight and all the other Penn State graduates. We have 770,000 alumni, which is truly outstanding. Thank you very much, and it's quite an honor that I now recognize.